Tsavo Reserve, late morning. A young elephant stood alone near the dry brush line, one leg raised just slightly, just enough to signal that something wasn't right. There were no calls for help, no panic. The land around him was quiet, but beneath the dust, something metallic caught the light. A single loop of wire buried in the soil, cinched tightly around the elephant's right front leg. Blood had seeped into the earth, darkening the red soil beneath him. He did not move. His body swayed forward and back, each shift subtle and controlled, like he had learned that too much movement made it worse. Flies gathered where skin had broken open. The leg had begun to swell above the wire, thick and inflamed, and the muscles around his shoulder twitched in response to pain. The rest of him, trunk, ears, breath, stayed unnaturally still. Ranger Elim had been walking a routine patrol from the east fence line, tracking spoor from a small zebra herd reported missing from the previous week's aerial count. It was not a search for elephants, nor anything urgent. But when he crossed the small rise above the dust basin, the shape drew his eyes instantly. Not because it moved, but because it didn't. He approached slowly without calling, only shifting the weight of his step to soften the noise of gravel underfoot. At a distance of 20 meters, the details came into view. The bulge in the leg, the faint tremor in the flank, the small dark stain beneath the foot. Then he saw the wire, stretched, rusted, knotted tightly with age. This was no recent trap. It had been laid months ago, maybe longer. Elim exhaled through his nose and lowered his bag to the ground. No tranquilizer, no team. Just the basic kit, a field knife, sterile water, and 2 rolls of gauze that had already seen one rainy season. He did not move closer yet. First, he waited. The elephant turned his head slightly, not in alarm but in slow acknowledgement. His ears shifted half an inch. His trunk did not rise, but his eye blinked once. Not fast, not fearful. Just a quiet acceptance of presence. "If you stand still," Elim whispered, "I can help." The trap had cut through the first layer of skin and into the muscle. Not a clean wound, jagged, raw, crusted with grit, but it wasn't actively bleeding now. That meant pressure had sealed it, or exhaustion had slowed circulation. Either could be dangerous. He stepped forward carefully, crouching low. The elephant did not bolt. That alone was a miracle. Most would have panicked by scent or noise. This one had passed the point of fear. Only pain remained. The trap's mechanism was twisted tight, rusted into itself. It would take time. Elim unpacked the knife and began loosening the outer knots. Not cutting yet, just freeing the tension. Every motion had to be exact. If the elephant flinched, the wire would dig deeper. If he collapsed, the wound could tear. If he ran, he could die. Minutes passed without a sound. Just wind moving over dust and a soft, slow breath from the elephant's chest. His trunk finally lifted once, not in threat, just to rest gently against his own body, as if reminding himself he was still there. Elim touched the wire with the tip of the blade and began the first cut. The leg quivered, then stilled again. This would not be fast, but for the first time in hours, maybe days, the elephant was not alone. The knife had loosened one coil of the wire, but it wasn't enough. The metal beneath was sunken deep, sealed in by inflammation. Elim paused, pulling back just slightly to assess. The elephant remained still. No sudden movement, no flinch. Just the slow, rhythmic tremble of muscles long past their limit. The stillness was not peace. It was surrender. Elim reached for the radio clipped to his belt, pressing it gently so the static didn't startle. His voice stayed low, deliberate. He relayed coordinates, mentioned the leg wound, noted the presence of wire, and added a quiet request for gauze, sedatives, and a backup field unit. Then he let the device fall silent. There was no response yet, but he hadn't expected one so soon. Help could take over an hour, and even then movement risked further damage. The elephant shifted his weight again. Not much, just enough that dust scattered from beneath his foot, and the scent of old blood rose slightly into the air. His eyes stayed half-closed. Not from calm, but from exhaustion. His ear flicked once, a weak attempt to push away a fly, then returned to its drooped position. Elim crouched again, careful not to move too close too fast. He studied the leg, not just the wound, but the angle of the joints, the flex in the shoulder, the way the other legs compensated. The injury hadn't caused collapse yet, but it had begun to destabilize his stance. If the elephant buckled from fatigue, the force could tear the tissue around the snare. If he dropped before the wire was fully removed, it might not be salvageable. "If you fall now," Elim murmured, "we lose your leg." The elephant's trunk lifted once and hovered midair before folding back across his tusk. A quiet, half-coiled motion. Defensive, but not aggressive. He was conserving everything he had left. Elim slowly uncapped a bottle of sterile rinse and let a small stream fall across the exposed flesh around the wire. The elephant didn't cry out. He didn't lift the leg, but his side heaved once, a full-body breath, as if the cold liquid startled something deep within. His ribs showed with each breath now, not because he was starving, but because his muscles had stopped resisting. They simply rose and fell with the cycle of pain. His tail did not flick. His mouth did not move. There was no sound from him at all. The stillness stretched between them. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was acceptance. Enough for Elim to reach again for the blade and begin shaving away the final wrapping of wire near the underside of the limb. He worked without speaking now. Words were not needed. Just presence. What remained unspoken was the risk. If the wire cut deeper during removal, the elephant could lose circulation permanently. If infection had already spread into the bloodstream, even survival might lead to systemic collapse. And if the calf ran in panic after being freed, a sprint on torn ligaments could rupture the leg completely. Each possibility was real. Each one hovered just beneath the dust. Elim eased the last coil away from skin, loosening it from the buried knot. The elephant shifted again, a step, a quiver. Not an escape, but a natural reaction. His knee buckled slightly, but then held. A single groan came from his throat. Low and unformed. Not a trumpet, not a cry, just sound. The moment passed. The calf held his stance. The leg bled again, but slower. The trap lay open on the earth now, rusted steel against red soil. Elim stayed kneeling beside him. No touch, no victory, just the waiting. Far off, the radio clicked softly, and the elephant remained, standing, silent, alive. The last message through the radio had confirmed backup was on the way, but far off, too far to wait. The sun was beginning to tip overhead, pulling heat down across the open plain. The elephant's skin, thick and cracked near the wound, shimmered faintly with rising warmth. Flies returned to the open split where flesh met rust. The wire had not only cut, it had twisted into muscle, curled under skin, and embedded itself like thorns in bark. It was no longer a simple trap. It was part of the leg now. Elim rolled his sleeves quietly and placed the gauze beside him. The calf did not move. His body remained tilted just enough to relieve pressure on the injured limb. His breaths were slower now. Not deeper, just further apart. Each rise of his ribs seemed to take more time than the last, as if his body had started rationing effort. His trunk hung low, not resting, not swinging. It simply drooped, like an exhausted rope with nothing left to hold. Elim pressed 2 fingers lightly along the calf's upper leg, just above the swelling, and found the pulse. Weak, erratic, but still present. The bleeding had slowed further. That could mean the vessel had constricted in defense, or that blood flow was failing. If circulation stopped completely, tissue would begin to die. If infection took hold, it could reach his organs in hours. If sedation was delayed and he collapsed mid-removal, the weight of his body could tear what remained of the ligaments. These were not possibilities. These were facts. Elim opened his blade again and leaned closer to the coil. He didn't saw. He didn't force. He worked slowly, tip under edge, lifting the metal-free one embedded line at a time. The elephant let out a low exhale, not loud, not strained, just a long release of air, almost like giving in. His body remained still. He did not resist. Dust floated up from the ground with each small movement. The air smelled of old iron and sweat. Elim paused to wet a cloth and pressed it gently beneath the wound, careful not to touch exposed flesh. He was cleaning space for the next cut. But the action carried something else. A message that this would be slow, that pain wouldn't rush them now. The calf's tail shifted once, brushing against the outer curve of his own leg. A single, involuntary flick, like a leftover signal from before the pain had silenced his body. His ears did not lift. His eyes did not fully open. But the movement mattered. It meant something inside him still responded. Elim began the third loop. This was the most dangerous. Buried deepest, nearly fused beneath the edge of skin, hardened by pressure. He adjusted the blade's angle and slipped it under with care. One wrong turn and the muscle could split. One wrong grip and the knife could slip. The wire gave slightly, not all at once. Just a flex like a breath returned to metal. The elephant's leg trembled again, and for a moment, it looked like he might fall. Elim pulled back, waited, watched the balance in the joints. The calf adjusted his weight on the back legs, just enough to stay upright. No sound, no collapse, just quiet endurance. "You're doing fine," Elim whispered. The last segment came free with a soft, metallic snap. Not from force, from release. Elim leaned away and let the broken trap fall beside them. It landed in the dust, open now, no longer curled around life. The wound bled again, steady and red. But this time the bleeding was necessary. It flushed the rot. It carried the heat. It showed the body was still trying. Elim reached for gauze and pressed it lightly around the deepest edge. The calf didn't move. But his head tilted a fraction toward the sound of water being uncapped again, a response so faint it could have been missed. Not attention. Not gratitude. Just life, still sensing the world. Wind passed once across the plain, shifting the dust in a low whisper. And beneath it all, the elephant remained standing. Wounded. Breathing. Alive. The snare was gone. The bleeding had slowed. But the worst danger had not passed. Elim sat cross-legged just beyond the calf's reach, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his breath matching the shallow rise and fall of the elephant's ribs. The trap had come off cleanly, but its damage remained buried inside. Torn tissue, strained joints, unseen bruises that could rupture under pressure. The calf had not collapsed, but he had not shifted more than a few inches since the final loop fell to the dirt. Across the sky, the sun began its slow drop westward, softening its glare into haze. The heat did not lift, only settled differently, less sharp, more clinging. Elim reached for the last of the water in his flask and poured it carefully into a shallow metal pan. The sound was soft, intentional. The elephant did not react. His trunk still hung low. His body remained angled slightly off balance, using the strength of 3 legs to support what the 4th could no longer carry. Elim had seen calves walk too soon before. Relief made them reckless. The moment the pain eased, instinct pushed them forward. A step, a stumble, a tear, a fall. Once a young bull had stood within minutes of being freed and ruptured the tissue around his kneecap. He hadn't walked again. If this one ran, he would die. Even standing now risked everything. The swelling had not yet receded. Blood still pooled near the lower joint. The calf's breathing stayed shallow, measured. His eye blinked once. No flinch, no shift. But it was movement, a slow return of the world around him. Elim slid the water dish slightly closer. The calf did not reach. That was expected. He wasn't seeking comfort. He was surviving. Every part of his body, from the slow tension in his shoulder to the tiny muscle twitch above his hip, was working to stay upright without strain. He was not resting. He was holding. Elim unfolded a square of shade cloth from his pack and angled it between a low branch and a termite mound nearby, creating a crude shelter just wide enough to cast shadow across the elephant's front flank. The calf shifted his head slightly as the heat lifted from one side. Not much, just a lean. But it was movement again. Still cautious, still quiet, still alive. The flies had returned. Elim waved them off gently, using the cloth, not his hand. Any sudden movement might be misread. At this stage, the boundary between stillness and collapse was thin. A startled jerk could cause a tendon tear. A stumble backward could break the leg entirely. The line was that narrow. He checked the wound again, pressing gently along the tissue surrounding the cut. It was warm, but not hot. The bleeding had crusted. The gauze was holding. The skin had not grayed, no sign of necrosis yet. But every minute upright pressed pressure back into the limb. Circulation could either return or fail. Minutes passed. The wind shifted again, moving low across the plain and through the grass at their feet. The elephant lifted his trunk just enough to rest it on the side of his own leg, a small, self-soothing gesture. Still no effort to step. That, too, was a choice. "You're almost there," Elim said softly. He leaned back and sat again in the dirt, not watching closely now, just staying near, just offering stillness as a companion. And beneath the cloth, in the slow shade of afternoon, the calf did not fall. He did not walk. He simply remained, steady, breathing, waiting with him. The heat had settled into the soil, quiet and heavy. Hours had passed with little change. The elephant calf stood in the same place, wounded legs still lifted, trunk occasionally shifting in the dust. Elim had not moved far. He remained nearby, alternating between watching and resting, never pushing, never pulling. Stillness had become the language between them. Then the ground trembled, faint but clear. At first, it felt like nothing, just a slow pulse beneath the heel, a weight carried across distance. Elim sat upright. The calf did not react, not at once, but after a moment his ears lifted a fraction, not enough to signal alarm, only recognition. Something had changed in the air. The vibration deepened. A low, rhythmic pulse rolled across the plain, too even to be wind, too soft to be thunder. Elim turned toward the southern ridge just past the thinned brush where the land broke slightly open. From behind the rise, shapes began to emerge, large, slow-moving, steady. Not a full herd, but a small group, maybe 5 or 6. The formation was unusual. They weren't grazing, they weren't scattered. They moved in a deliberate line with one older cow slightly ahead of the rest, leading without rush, without hesitation. Elim recognized her, the matriarch from the eastern basin. He had tracked her movements in seasons past, known for her caution, known for her quiet leadership. She rarely crossed this side of the reserve unless prompted by water scarcity or distress. And yet, here she was now, walking straight toward the shaded rise. The calf shifted again, more clearly this time, not away from the sound, but toward it. His head lifted, and for the first time since morning, his trunk curled slightly into the air. The wound still pulsed. The leg still quivered. But something beneath the exhaustion had stirred. The herd advanced slowly, with space between each step. No rush, no panic. The matriarch paused once at the edge of the lower slope, raising her head as if scanning the air, then continued forward. There was no noise between them, no trumpet, no call, only presence. The air felt thick with dust and something older, something that traveled between elephants without sound. The lead cow adjusted her path, breaking from the line, and walked a separate arc that curved closer toward the resting calf. The others followed, not overtaking her, not closing ranks, just mirroring, respectful in distance. Elim did not move. He knew what was at stake now. If the calf tried to join too soon, the risk of collapse remained. If he fell in front of the herd, it could confuse or delay their reaction. But if he remained still, and they accepted him, it might be enough. The matriarch reached the flat stretch just beyond the shaded cloth and stopped. Her ears fanned outward briefly, catching the air. Her eyes scanned not Elim, but the calf. She took one slow step forward and waited. Her trunk lowered gently, not to touch, only to be near. The calf took in another breath, then released it in a low exhale, audible this time. Drawn from somewhere deeper. He did not step, but his entire body turned toward her. The others began to close in, slow and wide in their approach. No urgency, no crowding, just a return. And across the dry plain, with nothing but the wind in the brush and the faint scent of dust, the ground continued to hum. Not from danger now, but from the weight of something coming back. The calf shifted again, a quiet motion that rippled through his shoulders but did not reach the leg. His body leaned, not in collapse, but in effort, as though something inside him had begun to respond to the scent, the tremor, the presence of others. His ears fluttered once, slow and unsure. Then he let out a sound. It wasn't loud, not even clear. A soft, guttural groan, shaped more by breath than voice, but enough to carry through the dust toward the waiting line of elephants. The matriarch paused. Her body stilled completely, head held mid-turn, ears forward but calm. Then she lifted her trunk just slightly, and the sound she made was brief. One low trumpet, soft and shaped more by air than strength. It was not a warning. It was not a call. It was a signal of recognition. The herd responded without hesitation. The second female shifted her footing, nudging the younger behind her. The formation altered, bending around the curve of the basin in a new line, no longer parallel, no longer distant. They had changed direction. They were coming to him. Elim felt the air shift again, not colder, just fuller. He kept his posture low, quiet. No sudden movement. This moment was no longer his to lead. One of the older cows stepped forward. Her tusks were short, worn from age, and her skin bore the pattern of old injuries, thickened patches, healed bites, and the scars that came only from decades of survival. She did not rush. She moved with patience born from instinct, a rhythm older than pain. She reached the calf and stood beside him without touching. For a moment, she did nothing but breathe, letting their sides align, letting him feel her weight beside his. Then, slowly, she turned her head and placed her trunk against his flank. Not a push, not a pull. Just touch. Firm enough to be felt, gentle enough to be welcome. The calf shuddered. It started in the wounded leg, a tremble from within the muscle, and climbed upward through the shoulder until his whole frame seemed to respond. His head lowered, then lifted again. His trunk curled at the tip and grazed the ground. Uncertain, then steadied. She remained there. The others drew near but did not close the circle yet. They waited, respecting the space between healing and return. Elim watched closely now. The touch had not been symbolic. It had not been comforting. It had been functional, a test, a call to see if the calf could follow. And the answer came slowly. The calf shifted weight to his other front leg, then lifted the injured one clear off the ground. He held it there, trembling, unsure, but the back legs stepped, just once. One small, dragging step forward. Then stillness. Elim held his breath. One step was progress, but it came at cost. If he placed pressure on the wound, it could reopen. If he overbalanced, The fall could be permanent. The older cow stepped again, just slightly ahead of him, and paused. Her trunk stayed low now, near the dirt, waiting. The calf leaned into his body again, and this time his front foot touched down. Not fully, not firmly, but it met the ground. The dust moved under it. He did not fall. The herd began to shift inward, not surrounding him, but accepting him. They made space, moved wider around the wounded leg, angled their formation so he would not be rushed. For the first time since morning, the calf took a second step. It was halting, clumsy, marked by effort, but it was real. Elim lowered his gaze and let the moment pass without interruption. This was no miracle of healing. The wound remained. The danger had not vanished. Infection could still spread. The leg might still fail, but the herd had returned, and the calf had followed. The sun dipped lower, drawing longer shadows across the plain. Wind brushed the tall grass in soft waves. The herd moved forward together, slow and uneven, carrying the smallest among them back into the line. The dust beneath the calf's feet shifted in small clouds, stirred by unsteady steps and the low movements of those gathering near. The herd did not rush him. Their pace remained slow, each elephant adjusting in rhythm with the one beside them. The matriarch had stepped ahead, but now she circled back, placing herself to his left. Her position was deliberate, close but not touching, protective but patient. The others followed her lead. A juvenile male moved into place behind the calf, his trunk brushing the ground as he passed. Then a younger female, still lean from adolescence, took up the space just ahead, glancing only once before settling. The air filled with the sound of breath, deep, steady, ancient. No calls, no signal, only the quiet sound of life shared between them. The calf remained still for a moment longer. His front leg hovered above the earth, the wound wrapped and darkened with dried blood. He did not seem ready to place weight on it again. The muscles in his side quivered, not from fear, but from strain. His head hung low. The act of standing had taken nearly all that remained. Then a shift came. It began with the matriarch. She turned slightly, just enough to let her side press gently against the calf's shoulder. Not force, just warmth. An anchoring weight to remind him he wasn't alone. He blinked, then raised his head. The movement was slow, heavy, almost reluctant, but it came with purpose. His trunk swung out in a soft arc and then returned, tapping lightly against his chest. He lifted his wounded foot once more, hovered, then set it down. He did not collapse. The rest of the herd formed around him with instinctive grace. One by one, they took up positions until a wide, quiet circle had settled. They faced inward, toward the calf, their bodies angled in soft curves that offered shelter without confinement. Each elephant made contact in some way. A trunk across the back, a lean of the head, the gentle press of a shoulder. Elim stayed back, kneeling low on the slope where the shade still held. He had not moved since the first contact. This was not his moment to witness up close. It belonged to them now. His presence was still, respectful, and watching only when necessary. The calf lifted his head higher. The second lift took more strength, more air, but it stayed raised this time. His eyes were clearer, no longer dull with exhaustion. His stance, though uneven, had straightened. The matriarch released her touch and stepped slightly away, giving him space. The circle remained. The air grew warmer again as the sun tilted lower, sending long streaks of gold across the brush. This was not triumph. The leg was still weak. Infection was still possible. The walk ahead would test what healing had begun. But the moment was clear. The calf was no longer outside the herd, and the herd had not questioned his return. A young female reached forward, her trunk resting lightly on the calf's flank. She did not stay long, just a touch, a confirmation that he was part of them again. He responded with the barest lean toward her. The wind moved again, brushing across the plain and bending the taller grass in low, whispering waves. In the distance, the first sound of nightbirds began to rise, quiet and far off, yet grounding. Inside the circle, the calf did not lie down. He remained standing, and all around him the herd stood too, silent, still, present. The last of the heat began to lift from the ground as the shadows stretched long across the basin. The matriarch turned first, slow and measured, the arc of her step wide enough to signal change without pressure. The others followed her lead, shifting one by one from stillness to motion, adjusting their bodies to the open path ahead. No signal was given, but all understood. It was time to move. The calf hesitated. His leg had not regained strength, and his breath came in quiet, uneven draws. But the circle around him did not tighten. It opened. The formation eased outward, making space for him to follow without rush. The older cow who had first touched his flank paused, then stepped forward, glancing back only once before continuing. Elim remained crouched against the rise, his hands resting quietly on his knees. He did not stand. He did not speak. At this stage, silence mattered more than guidance. Any sound from him could startle, could shift the rhythm the herd had found again. The calf lifted his head. Not high, just enough to see the path clearing in front of him. His trunk curled slightly and dropped, brushing the dirt. He tested his leg, pressing the foot to the earth, shifting weight slowly forward. The joint bent, uncertain, then caught. He stepped. It was a limp, deep and awkward, marked by hesitation, but it held. The wound reopened slightly, a thin line of red along the edge of the old gauze, but it did not split. His next step was smaller, the third steadier. No balance yet, but movement, forward. The matriarch paused once more, waiting at the head of the line until the calf reached the edge of the herd. She resumed only when he fell into step beside a younger bull, their flanks brushing once, briefly. That was enough. Elim watched as they continued, slow, wide steps over dry ground, forming a loose line that followed the curve of the terrain. Dust lifted in low spirals behind their heels, not from speed, but from the weight of their return. The calf moved near the middle now, his limp clear but stable. He did not fall behind. Each step carried risk. If the leg collapsed, the herd might have to stop again. If swelling worsened overnight, infection could return. The wound remained fresh, and distance alone could undo the day's work. But for now, he walked. That was the only measure that mattered. Elim remained still until the last of the herd passed the far scrub line, their outlines marked by the sinking light. The sun dipped just above the ridge, casting gold across the plains. The wind moved again, slower now, cooler, stirring the grass in soft sways beneath his boots. No one would see the moment the calf lay down that night. No ranger would mark his breathing as he settled beside the older cows. But this part, the leaving, would stay. The quiet departure, the soft dust rising in their wake, the slow rhythm of feet that did not hurry. The herd moved as one again, and behind them the heat faded from the ground. The light softened across the path they left behind.